Okay, so good morning, everyone. Hopefully, you can hear me okay. I'm based in York today, but today we're actually joined by Jane Austen,
Hi
our
there.
special guest. So, where are you today, Jane?
I was one of the people that exited London during lockdown. So I was in Brixton and now I'm just outside London and loving it, apart from the pollen. So I'm really suffering today. Yeah.
That's okay. I can't see you. I can't see your snotty nose, Jane. So don't worry about me. We can't see it on. Can't
Uh-huh.
see it.
Oh, good.
No, but thank you so much for braving it. Really appreciate you sharing your morning with us. So I guess it's good to get to know a little bit about you. So from LinkedIn, can I just share with you what it looks like from the outside? So it looks like you've had quite a successful career so far. Obviously now at Digitas, but you've previously worked at places like you've been the head of UX at the Telegraph. You've worked for Move for a number of years as was it director of design and experience. Like amazing career so far. So yeah, would you like to just share a little bit about who you are and
Sure,
how
yeah.
you've got here?
So going back a few years, I did a master's in philosophy, which made me completely unemployable. And then I spent a while teaching English as a foreign language, except it was actually Scottish as a foreign language. Did another master's, saw that it was quite difficult to get a job or get people to know you. So I put on the first ever sort of degree show for that design master's, invited loads of people along, got a job out the back of that. Then there was a spectacular .com crash, the first one. We might be heading into a second one. And the company I was working for went spectacularly bankrupt. So I phoned all the clients and said, oh, do you have somebody looking after your account? They were the clients I was working with. And then I set up my own little agency. And then that got acquired and it got acquired and it got acquired. So I ended up working for Digitas. That was 15 years ago. And then went off, worked client side for quite a while. Probably most interestingly, the Telegraph, I was the second hire in the new product team and grew the team to about 80 people. Then at Moo, hired loads of people, built the first research team. And then at Babylon Health, I grew the team from about 2 to about 90 globally. And then briefly at Flow, hired a few folk there, and now I'm back at Digitas, and I'm Chief Experience Officer, which means that I help our clients understand sort of the power of design and product thinking, the experience to impact their business, and I'm growing the team there as well. So I must have interviewed, God, hundreds and hundreds of people over the years, and I just thought I'd come and share some of the great interview techniques I've seen and some of the less good, so people could learn from that.
Okay, fantastic. It sounds fun. It sounds great. I'm excited for our chat. So, what I want to do is we've got some people watching online at the minute. I really want you all to throw a question in for Jane. Are there any kind of questions or things that you don't know about the interview process or the types of questions that people might ask? And hopefully, Jane might be able to shed some light on that.
Yes.
So please do send them in, and we'll go through them.
Cool.
So also on the call later on, we'll introduce Jenny Butter, who I'd love to introduce you all to. She's our new careers advisor. She's wonderful, and I can't wait for her to have some questions for you as well, Jane. So I guess what I'd like to bring forward today is that when we last spoke, Jane, you mentioned a really good point about some of the things that you like to hear from people that are interviewing at the time that they've messed up. Oh, you said that the F word to describe this.
I do, sorry. Well, yeah,
But like times that people have screwed up, could you shed some light on that? Why do you like to hear about
yes.
things like that,
Well,
stories like
it's
that?
one of many questions I ask, but and that's usually my surprise question, so I shouldn't have told you that.
Ah,
Yeah, but why I like that is because everybody messes up. Absolutely, everybody messes up. It's how you deal with it. I think is really interesting, and one of the things I try to look for is something called a growth mindset, which is a bit of an Americanism. But what it really means is that you are continually learning and improving. Because, like, I've messed up. Everyone's messed up. It's a bit, will you mess up again in the same way? Hopefully not. And so I'd like to hear about what mistakes people have made, how they responded, even how they respond to the question. Can they think on their feet? Are they honest? Are they too honest, or do they bullshit a little bit? And then most importantly is the lesson they've learned. Like, is it perhaps that the next time they know they need to prepare better, or they don't make assumptions, or but it really gives you such an insight into someone's personality. Oh, I've just seen someone, Sam Callan, that's a brilliant follow-up question. How important is it to stand out in terms of personality? For example, have you hired someone who hasn't had the most experience for the role but feels the right fit for my team? Absolutely. Now, this could be slightly misinterpreted, because there's this expression about culture fit, which I think culture fit can be actually really problematic. And often you hear about culture fit. When I've heard it go wrong, it's like a bunch of like white sort of techie dudes looking for another white techie dude that thinks like them, and it's a culture fit. I like to try and think about culture add. So is somebody going to be adding something to the culture? So it doesn't mean that you're exactly the same type of person, but it means that you're bringing something that maybe the team doesn't have, or it's going to make the team better. And that could be like, being quite insightful. It could be that you have a different perspective in the world that's going to help us all learn. Or it could be that you've got this growth mindset, or that you've got something that helps the team become more rounded and better. So that doesn't mean everyone's personality is going to fit everyone's team. But also, I believe you should hire for potential as much as experience. So if someone's got really good potential and you can see that, it means that maybe they've been a bit proactive about getting in touch, or they've been doing, I hate to say extra work, because not everyone's got that time or opportunity or health to be able to do that. But somehow they've done something where they've been growing or learning. They've done that little bit extra. It doesn't mean extra work, but it means maybe they've been reading, but something that you can see that they've got real potential to be a real joy to work with. And that's what I look for as much as experience.
A joy to work with. And so, Jane, from what you've just said, though, it's quite clear that you would be a really strong manager. You've got so much empathy and so much. Yeah, I'd love to work for you, Jane. I'm sure many people on this call. So, you talk about hiring for potential. How can you portray potential in an interview?
So I think it's being able to sort of think and unpack your work, and think about the context that you work, and think about having that empathy as well. So people who really stood out for me over the years, maybe they get in touch, and they're a bit proactive up front. So perhaps before the interview, they ask if they could have a check-in, or what kind of thing you're looking for. They help sort of almost manage me as much as I might be managing them. So like saying, okay, maybe I'm looking for these two kind of case studies. Is that what you're after? Or just somehow being quite proactive about understanding what the situation is. That's always great to see. People, I think, who've just got that positivity, so when I ask that question, if they've instead of saying, oh, it's everyone else's fault, sort of saying, well, yeah, I made a mistake there, and owning that mistake, or owning a problem, but then doing something to make the situation better. These are small things, but if you think about the great people that who bring that positivity, or that energy, or that empathy and kindness, there's kind of little questions to ask about how people operate, that you can start to discover this. And this is why I absolutely never, I have done it, but I've hated it, and it's never worked out well, is giving people tasks to do, giving a designer a task. You may maybe do this if it's somebody who's straight out of uni and they haven't really got any work experience. There may be occasional circumstances why you give somebody a design task, but I'd say 99% of the time is absolutely useless, because all you're doing there is seeing how somebody can do a design task. It doesn't show you how well somebody is to work beside, or to solve problems. So I much prefer people to show me a case study or two, and then I can ask all the questions, because design is a very collaborative sport. It's a team sport. You've got to understand what problem you're solving, why that's the right one to solve, how you solved it correctly. Particularly in digital, you're working in a cross-functional team. How do you work with those people to make the design real? So if you have a case study, you've got real stories and real history that you can ask people to tell you about. And then by sort of careful questioning about how they collaborate with other people, maybe someone's blocked them, or maybe they've got a solution they're not too happy with. Why did they go for that solution? Why did they not do something else? And then you can understand how people think and how they work in a sort of really complex environment that is digital.
Okay, yeah, that's very helpful there, Jane. Thank you. And I guess a question that always comes up from students that I've spoken to is like, if you get a question about conflict, how have you resolved conflicts within a team? What are
Oh,
the types of examples you're looking for? Because there's a varying scale,
okay.
there's
Get
of
them
what
by
we
the
could.
neck, headbutting them is a no. Very Glaswegian. No. I think recognizing it's a conflict and being able to talk
Okay.
about it, not get kind of angry or whatever, seeing the other person's point of view. So having that empathy, and then but also being able to stand up for yourself. So it's a really, really difficult. It's a difficult thing, but that conflict is a difficult thing at work. So I think you will always have conflict at work, and thinking about how you resolve that. So I think it's having a bit of
Mhm,
confidence in yourself, empathy for the other person, ability to negotiate,
mhm,
and to find a solution that works for everybody. And you should be working in these cross-functional teams. There should be like healthy conflict. It's important.
mhm.
I would expect people to be having sort of quite heated debates, but as long as it's not personal, it's about the work. And if you're able to bring evidence or reasoning for why something should be
Mhm.
X instead of Y, have that conversation. And there's a quote which I really love. It's called "Strong opinions lightly held." So
Yeah.
that's kind of thing I'm looking for. So someone who really, thinks that you should do X for a particular reason. You've got robust rationale for why you do X, but maybe you listen and you hear that Y is better, or as a combination
Mhm,
of X and Y, and you can take that on board and discuss it. That's what I'm looking for. So conflict is actually good,
mhm.
mostly. Is how you deal with it. But then if someone's been absolutely dreadful to you, maybe that's maybe not something you'd bring up in an interview, but maybe something that we could talk about, later on, or you might want to be reassured that you're coming into a place where kind of like nasty personal conflict doesn't really happen. And that's more like you should be interviewing the people you're going to work with, because interview is a conversation. It should work two ways. You should be
Yeah.
doing your investigation to see how things like this are dealt with, and would you have the support, and is it a toxic environment, or is it a
Mhm.
place with nice, healthy, open conflict? And
Yeah.
so yeah, don't shy away from answering quite smart questions to make sure that you're going to the right place for you to thrive. Cool. I see some more
That's
questions that we've
great.
got.
Yeah, we got more.
Yeah.
Okay. What does
What
it
does
really mean to work in an agile environment?
Yeah. Okay, it's probably got two meanings, two main meanings. First one is agile as a method of delivering software, which of course I'm a huge fan of, and what I think most people are. And some
Mhm,
people call that as agile as a capital A, and then I don't really, but some people, you may hear this expression, agile as a capital A, just referring to the software delivery mechanism. Agile with a small a means it's people, how people think about things, but actually it's both the same thing, I think. Agile as a software delivery mechanism means that you break your work up into small chunks. You work in cross-functional teams. You deliver a little bit of
mhm,
work. You should be testing, measuring and learning, although a lot of places don't. And then you should examine what you've done and how you've done it to see if there's ways for you to continually improve. And then you just continually work as a team with all these rituals, they're called, agile
mhm.
rituals. So that's like retros, collaborative grooming. Sometimes you work in a scrum. So there's been millions of books, I think probably literally millions of articles and words written about this. So it's definitely worth reading if you're not quite sure. And then agile more broadly, I think, means an organization that is learning, that is using data and evidence to make decisions, and is able to sort of like, pivot or be nimble or change direction if they discover that they're doing the wrong thing, or the evidence is telling them that something is wrong. But then there's a lot of kind of just lip service paid to this, and it's basically you still do what the boss says, but you do it in 2 weekly rhythms. That's not really agile, but people call it agile. Some people, I call that fragile. Or Waggle, like,
Fragile.
yes. So it again, this is where I think if you're not quite sure what it means, then I would go and read
Mhm,
some books about this. There's a
mhm,
wonderful writer called John. Oh my God, I've gone blank on his name. Product John Cutler. John Cutler writes a lot about agile. He's a product manager. I love him to bits.
mhm, mhm,
Melissa Perry. There's quite a few like really great writers, some from a design background, who can tell you what it means to work in an agile environment, and a good functioning agile environment. So I would read about that. And then if you were in interviews, I would do a bit of pre-work to try and see what it is that appeals to you about agile. What are signals to you that somewhere is a good place to work? And part of that is, as I said, the learning environment, people being autonomous, being able to have a viewpoint. and then think about some questions to help you be able to unpack that and see if this place truly is an agile company, or if it's just, sort of hierarchical, but they do things in 2-week sprints. And then, use that. You'd be an investigator the same way when you're designing, you're investigating something to see if X solution is better than Y. Do the same when you're interviewing. I hope that helped. Yasmin's got another great question.
Yeah, she has. Okay, right. So Yasmin said, what would you say as designers are key issues when working with developers and product managers as a designer?
So this is another amazing question. And my God, there is so much debate and discussion about this right now. Yeah. So personally, what I like to see is that you have a developer, a product manager, and a designer working in something called a triad. And the three of them are sort of representing different views of the product and the customer, but it's a sort of overlapping Venn diagram. And this is what I mean by healthy conflict. So a good designer and a good developer should be able to understand what problem they're solving, who they're solving it for, and the developers should understand this as much as the designer. And then when you're working out what you need to do next, the developer, the designer could talk and say, and I would expect a developer to say, oh, do you know, there's actually an easier way if we do X instead of Y, or if we, I keep saying X instead of Y, I'm trying to think of more more broad examples. Or one of the best I've seen is a developer taking part in research, and then the developer saying, oh God, I didn't realize that was the problem they had. Well, do you know what, we can fix it like this. And they had a solution by just, tweaking some code, which actually changed a lot of the problems that the users were having, and we didn't need to really redesign anything. So having this group of people, developer, designer, product manager, working together, understanding what they're doing, having this healthy tension where they each have a slightly different view of the world and the product and coming to a solution is what should happen. What often would happen is if a place isn't so well organized, you may have the product manager doing a lot of the decisions and just telling designers what to build. I've seen that in some really very badly run places. You have the product manager who thinks perhaps they know everything, or they have hunches, or they say that they're doing growth hacking, where they just release lots of different versions of something and see which one performs best. That's only part of a much more complex and broad product management process where you start with problems and you end with experiments. So I think it depends on the culture. The problems I've seen is the product managers thinking they're a bit godlike, doing a lot of the research themselves, but not really understanding how to do research, or being too directional, being too autocratic. Or you may have developers which are not being brought into the process efficiently, so they don't quite know what they're building or why. Things are too fragmented. You end up with lots of upfront design. It's perhaps product management or directed, or it's perhaps sort of hierarchically directed by somebody in the organization. Far too much upfront design, and the developers get stuck because they don't know what to build in what order. So when this works really well, and John Cutler's another amazing, I mentioned him, but just read him. When it works really well is when you've got these three people working really closely together, using research and data, experimenting, being open to learning, tweaking, and then continually sort of iterating and gradually improving, but also with a clear vision to aim for. And it's quite difficult, and it's difficult also to get a team that trusts each other and is able to have these discussions that's necessary. So you need a bit of infrastructure around it. You need people to support the designers and the developers and the product managers. You need a culture that allows this autonomy and discussion. So it's amazing when it works well. It can be quite soul destroying if it works badly. So again, that's one of your jobs, is when you're interviewing, and you might not get the nirvana of this being brilliant in your first couple of jobs. And I've actually been places where it's worked brilliantly and then it stops working. It's quite a fragile thing to be able to work like this. So I'd say the issues are being too autocratic, not enough autonomy, too directional, too fragmented, too much upfront work, and designers not getting the opportunity, I think, to really help be part of strategy, and instead being much more executional.
Okay, thanks for that. Hopefully that answered that question, Yasmin, give you some clarity on that. We've got Winmy, who has asked about, can you highlight red flags in an interview?
Now, I don't know which side this would be. Who would be red flagging?
I guess as the applicant. Yeah, yes, applicant coming in.
Yes, what would be red flags? God, hang on a minute. There's so many. Let me have a little think about this. Maybe well, first of all, been given a task unless you're really junior and they've got a reason to give you a task. I think design tasks are outmoded. Who's in the interview? Are you being interviewed by a developer? You're a designer, and there's no other designers in the room. How are you treated? Are you messed around, or are you treated nicely? Are people respectful with your time? Do you have a clear job description? Do you understand your reporting lines? Or it's all a little bit hazy? As I've spoken about, sort of the agile world, is it an organization that learns and experiments, or designers just told what to do? Is there a career development for design? Where does design report into? I think loads and loads of places now design reports into product, which I find so annoying. Because you end up, there's a glass ceiling for design. Your product always, and often product people come from a tech background, so you often have a CTO, a CPO, and design's kind of floating around underneath. It's not a red flag, unfortunately, because that's kind of just how a lot of organizations are set up, but it is annoying. So if there's some other way that design works, or reports into, or what's the background of the person that design ultimately reports into, is interesting. How are decisions made? That's a really interesting one to unpack. So if decisions are made on research and data and experimentation, or business value, but there's some rationale, or decisions are made because the chief product officer wants it. Can the person in the room explain to you how the last few decisions were made? What do you need to do to get promoted? Why did the last person leave? What's the kind of churn on it? Be careful how you ask these, of course, but churn's a really interesting one. Like, how long do people tend to stay in the role, and why did they leave? Were they promoted, or did they leave to go somewhere else? So you want to understand what it's like to work there, and career development, and how will you be able to be sort of quite directional about your own work, or will be people just giving you things to do that you don't really have a say in and you can't explore? So I think the red flags are, you understand what the deal breakers are for you and what it means to be a good workplace, and then just ask questions to try and find out the opposite. But you do have to do it sensitively. Although it's a conversation, it's still the powers with the interviewer, so you have to be quite careful. Save up 2 or 3 questions. When they say, have you got any other questions? Save 2 or 3 and be clear to yourself what your deal breakers are, and then ask them, but ask them really nicely. Don't interrogate too much.
Okay, thank you for that, Jane. I think that was great. Sam's come back with another question. What are some of the best questions you've received from candidates at the end of an interview?
I think probably ones like that I've just sort of described, like, why did the last person leave? What's you most proud of, like, of working on here? What's the best part of your product? Trying to understand, trying to understand either the environment or the product itself. That's really interesting. Questions where people have maybe done a little bit of research. The question I really don't like is, have I got the job then, or have I not? Have I told you enough about the job? I was like, I don't know. I'm going to see 2 or 3 people. I can't. Completely fair. It's a fair question, actually, but I can't answer it, so I feel terrible. But yeah, I think questions where people, and I can't really think of any off the top of my head because they're quite specific, but where people have done a little bit of interview in the place that they're coming into, that shows they're interested and shows they've thought about what's important to them, and they've asked a thoughtful question to investigate that a little bit. I find those ones are, and I can't say, I'd love to be able to give you, Sam, these are the 3 questions that will get you a job. They're not really like that. The best questions have always been quite considered and thoughtful and based on a little bit of research and some thinking.
Okay, and we'll move on. Thank you, Sam, for the question. We've got Isaac. What is a weakness in themselves? What is a weakness in themselves you'd like to hear a candidate highlight in the interview? And what's something we should absolutely avoid saying, even if we think it sounds good in our head?
I don't know. I never asked this question.
Oh, I don't know. My headphones aren't working, but
Hang on,
I
is
can't
that
hear you,
better?
Jane. Oh,
Can you
yeah.
hear me now?
Yeah, there you are. Yeah, I can hear you.
Uh-oh.
What's up?
Should I
I can
leave
hear
and come
you.
back, perhaps? Or
No, we can hear you.
no,
We're
I still
good.
can't hear you. Hang on.
I can hear you. Just one second.
Say something.
Hello, Jane.
No. Well, that's annoying. And again, try again.
Hello, Jane, we can
No.
hear you.
Can you do this if you can hear me? No, I can't hear you.
It's okay.
So
Carry
weird.
on.
What would it be? I'm just plugging myself in case that makes any kind of a difference.
It's all right. Jane.
And settings. Audio.
Let's see.
Okay.
Just some
speaker
technical.
test. Okay, say something again.
Hey, Jane.
No, but I just tested the speaker there and it said it was working.
Weird.
Should I do this if you want me to leave and come back? Okay. Have I got the...
Okay. In the meantime, we'll bring Jenny in and we'll just have a chat. We're going to introduce Jenny. So, hey, Jenny.
Hi, Kirsty. Great
Hello.
to be a part of Love Circular, and what amazing insight that was from Jane.
Yeah, it was great. Really good. I loved how much detail she's gone into. She's come back, so we'll test her audio in a second. Jane's in the back. I can see Jane in the backstage. But Jenny, what was your favourite, or what were some of the tips that you think were really valuable there?
So I loved her insight about agile, because it's a term that seems to be bandied about all the time in conversations, in job descriptions, and yet the people I've spoken to aren't quite clear exactly about what's being asked for in the interview with that. So I thought that was a really good insight. And then I loved what she was saying about the fact that it was a two-way conversation as well. You know, for me, it's so important for us to find the right fit job. And so I think that an environment that lets you work that out is obviously going to be a good place where you'll thrive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Jenny, I'm going to leave you and Jane to field the questions. I'm going to add Jane back in to check her audio is working. Jane, are you with us?
I am. I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you. Fine.
Thank you.
I'm not sure what happened there. Technical glitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step out and I'm going to let you answer some more questions, and Jenny will also be able to add some colour to, hopefully. So I'll remove myself and I'll present the next question.
Cool. Okay then. So do I ask you the question? Isaac D, this is confusing me. So I'm easily confused. What is a weakness in themselves you'd like to hear a candidate highlight in an interview, and what's something we should absolutely avoid saying, even if we think it sounds good in our head? So I think I was just saying, this is one of these really annoying trick questions where people say, what's your weakness? And people say, oh, I really work too hard or something like that. It's just a terrible question. So maybe I'd like to maybe hear somebody, I don't know. This is a really difficult one. Isaac, you've stumped me, because I don't know if I want to hear weaknesses. I think everyone's got weaknesses. It's more that I'd want to hear somebody kind of just being a bit aware of something and done something to mitigate it. And what should you absolutely avoid saying? Or maybe that you hate working, or or I don't know, that you're a bully. I don't know. This is one of these trick questions that you might... Jenny, do you?
Yeah, so I coach on this question all of the time because it does come up. And I think it speaks very much into, Jane, what you were saying earlier about growth mindset. So there was a gentleman I was coaching on it who was honest, and he said he struggled with presentations. And so what we did was we coached on the fact that he had been to Toastmasters to learn how to do public speaking more efficiently, and he'd practiced, and it just showed his growth mindset about growing something that he found really hard. And so that's a good way to answer a weakness question, because it's honest, but it shows actually you have an attitude to grow and develop as well.
That's fair. Yeah, so I think personally, I wouldn't say what's your weakness, but I'd maybe be sort of trying to probe to find out what weakness might be. And so I'd like to see self-awareness and, as you said, growth mindsets. You've done something to mitigate whatever your weakness is. And and don't say anything about, like, I don't know, lying, drugs, anything like that. Just keep that to yourself. Have a reasonable weakness. Yeah.
And I think just another way that I've heard this question phrased is, what will you find most challenging about this job? It's the same answer, but that's another way that it can be phrased sometimes as well in interviews.
That's true. And I suppose you'd have to know what the challenges of the job would be.
Yeah.
That's tricky. God, interviewing's so tough, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. And so just what with that, I would say go through the job description line by line and look at what you're not confident in, and then you can be honest about that. And then you can talk about a time when you didn't know something before and talk about that, about actually how you quickly got up to speed. And so, you know, you would learn very quickly and how you'd overcome that challenge.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So Baseo, what are the questions asked after the interview that really impressed me? So I think we've had that one, and I'm really sorry, but I can't actually remember any specific questions. I think they've just been questions which showed to me that somebody understood themselves, understood the job they were coming into, were asking questions to make sure that it was a good fit. I do like a follow-up email, you know, or something where people, you know, follow up saying, here's like, you know, 3 projects I've done, or it was really nice to meet you. Or I did see there was a blog thing where some women, they read a lot about American recruiters and on LinkedIn, and I think there's just so much rubbish out there. But some women had said that somebody hadn't got back to her with a thank you letter, so she rejected her application, which is a load of nonsense. And I'm not suggesting.
What happened to my husband actually in America?
Really, bloody Americans? Did it really, Jenny?
Yeah. You know, briefly, he went for a job at a very high charitable foundation, and it was looking good and hadn't heard back. And they said, well, he didn't send us a thank you note. We were Brits, just moved there, had no idea about the thank you note. And actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was my question to you. It is a growing move in the UK. What are your thoughts on thank you notes, and what do you want to receive? And you just answered that for me.
It's a load of bollocks. Sorry for swearing. There's so much. There's so much of this kind of like, I think I don't know if it's American culture or what culture this is, but it seems to be that there's a huge trend in trying to find reasons to reject people. And this is just another hoop to jump through, where I think employers should be trying to find reasons to hire people, you know, trying to look for the positive and trying to see what's good about somebody and would they be a fit and would they thrive with you. But that is just such nonsense. But in saying that, I have had a follow-up email, and that was quite nice because there was some specific things that hadn't been quite clear in the interview. So somebody had given me, it was a follow-up email to say that they'd to give me some links or some further explanation, and that was quite nice. Something that you can do maybe to make something a bit more concrete was welcome, but it wasn't necessary. And I certainly wouldn't reject somebody if you hadn't done that. But yeah, there's possibly a growing trend of all of this Americanism in hiring, which is terrible.
If you would reject somebody, would it make them more favourable to you if they sent you a thank you note commenting on something else, sending you a link, giving you additional information?
It may do, you know, but it's not necessary. But it could be interesting, you know, if there was a part of a conversation that they had felt, you know, that they'd picked up on, that there was a piece of information that would be quite useful. That could be good, but I'm not, you know, it's not something I think maybe one candidate's done that once and it was nice. But other people have done it and it's not being a problem. I think if you can do it naturally, it might be interesting, it might be good, but I don't think I would, it's not a deal breaker. I put it that way. It's not a deal breaker. And I think actually it could maybe go down the side into being overly American. Thank you. Although I did my worst one I've ever done was I stood up at the end of an interview and I thought this is when I was being interviewed. And I remember reading that you were supposed to sort of thank people, and I got so flustered and I stood up and said, "Thank you for taking the opportunity to listen to me." And I got it completely back. So you have to be careful not to mess up, you know. So what's the next one? What's the best way to sell transferable skills coming in as a junior in order to negotiate a higher salary? I'm a BI developer with some design experience. It's a great question. I think this is just comes back to what we're talking about. If you understand what the job description is and what's necessary, then you can do a mapping exercise and think about what skills you already have of that job description, and you can talk about how you have these to a higher level than junior. And maybe it might not be able to negotiate a higher salary. Maybe it could, but it certainly could help you get the job. I think being able to go through it line by line and articulate what it is that you've got that other people might not have, or what experience you have that other people might not have, is super useful. Negotiating a higher salary is possibly a different question. And I think most places should have a salary band that you would be coming into the job, and there's a lower salary band for people with less experience at that job level, and then a higher salary band with people with more experience at that job level. A lot of places don't have salary bands, which in itself may be a red flag, because that means that they haven't done the work to formalise, career structures and salaries internally. I like to see a job with the salary advertised, although I've personally been in situations where I can't do that because it's a multinational. There's other reasons why you can't reveal the salary, but it's a green flag if the salary is revealed, and it's definitely worth negotiating. You're not accepting your first offer, so I would wait till you'd had a job offer, and then I would try to quite gently negotiate. You don't have to be too aggressive there. But I think it's always worth having a conversation about why you believe you might be worth something a little bit higher than you've been offered. What do you think, Jenny?
Yeah, I mean, I think salary bands are really important. And I think that, like you said, it's basically knowing what you bring. But I think, to be honest, when it comes to negotiation, it's more than just salary bands. I think you need to look at the overall package and decide what's most important to you. So is it working from home, or is it flexible working? Because I think that when you go into negotiations, you need to decide what a deal breaker for you is, and different people in different seasons of life. And so if you're in a season of life where, you need to be able to pick up your child, say from nursery, working hours and flexible working might be more important than a couple of extra £1,000 on your salary. So decide what's important and negotiate that, I think. And also always do it with grace, because this is a good example of a first impression and how you negotiate and how you influence others. So really do it with grace and a smile.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of it comes back down to knowing yourself. Doing that work to know yourself, like what's your strengths and weaknesses, what skills have you have, as Wunmi says, like how can they be transferred, what is the job like, what has actually been requested, and then deal breakers both in negotiation but also just the culture that you'd be going into, and understand how you would investigate to know if the culture is right for you, whether it's polite questioning, glass doors is really important. Knowing out of people that work there, looking at typical tenures or people moving on quite quickly, trying to understand the type of reporting lines. So do some due diligence when you're going for a job, because that will help you A, negotiate, and B, get to the right place in the right job. Okay. Case studies. What's the best way to present one of your case studies during the interview? So I recommend the STAR technique, which is situation, task, action, result. And you're telling a story, so it's really important to be able to tell the story like logically and coherently with some visual aids. So the situation is like, what were you asked to do? Why were you asked to do it? The task is specifically what you were needing to do. The action is how you approached it. So maybe you did some experiments, some research. The result, you might have been wrong. You might have done, the result might have not been what you expected. Why? What would you do about it? But tell this as a really compelling story. So maybe watch some presentations at some of the design conferences. Think about how it will convey your personality. So some of the best ones I've seen have actually did a bit of like memes and like funny little emojis. And the person was the kind of person you'd expect who would be doing like memes and emojis. And it was great. It really showed me that person's personality. I've seen other ones, very formal, and that's great because I get the understanding of who that person is too. So the same thing, I think, is what story are you trying to tell with your case study? Are you trying to demonstrate your design skills, your conflict management skills, how you work collaboratively? Think about your key attributes and then think about how the case study is going to demonstrate them. And then think about how you tell it as a story, because also being part of a designer is storytelling. You're presenting your work to people, you're convincing people to buy in, you're presenting your work to your team or to your boss or to whatever. So you have to really work on your presentation and storytelling skills, and that's the kind of subtext. When you're presenting a case study to me, I'm also looking at how you tell the story, how you might convince me about something. Is your attention to detail? Have you spell checked? Have you made it look good? Have you been honest about your process? So all of this, it's not just the case study itself, it's everything that goes around it I'll be looking at too.
Jane, how long should that be?
You should be told, and if you're not told, you can check. But you ask for a brief. I try to give everyone a brief, and So currently, because I'm hiring a lot, we'd probably have an hour. And of that hour, I would expect to see 1 or 2 case studies. So you could have 1 in depth or 2 smaller, a bit of an introduction to yourself, and opportunity for questions. So I'd give you like broad brush time that you have an hour. Within that, 10 minutes for questions, which leaves you 50 minutes. I also want you to introduce yourself. So what are you going to do with those 50 minutes? Are you going to maybe do 10 on your career, 20 on a case study, and then maybe another case study? That's kind of problem solving skills I want to see. I'm not going to be telling you I want it 19 minutes and 20 seconds. I want you to decide how you're going to use the time that you've been given. So you decide, is it 3 smaller case studies because you've got only 3 small things to talk about because you're quite junior? Or is it 1 more end-to-end case study where you start with uncovering the problem yourself and you take it all the way through to something you've shipped? You decide. So I want to understand how you use time and how you tell a story, how you present, how you. I might ask you why you've chosen to present a particular case study. So it should be clear to me why you've chosen it, why it's showing the best of you, or what skills it's showcasing. So yeah, it all depends. You should be given enough context to be able to decide how long you're going to be talking for. And if you haven't got enough, I think it's okay to come back to ask for clarity.
Please, can I just follow up on one thing that you said there, because it's a key thing for me. First impressions count. And you said within that it's, the tell me about yourself. And that's a question that everybody's asked, but so many people tend to fall down on. And so to start strong, what do you want to hear in that?
I want to hear, I would do it as part of I've asked for that often as part of the presentation. So maybe somebody could be a very quick showcase of 2 or 3 screens that they've worked on, or some pictures or something. I quite like it quite light-hearted. So and I always take the time to talk to somebody before an interview and tell them this is, I'd like to just get something that's a sense of you. Other people might not be asking you or giving you this pre-chat to help you understand what the context of what they want is. I'm asking it as part of the presentation. Other people may just want to ask you the question or tell me about you. And what do I want to hear is how you got to the point where you're sitting in front of me. Like maybe that I don't want your full life story really, but I'd like to know maybe why you decided to study design, what you've been doing before you studied design, if it's a career change, why what you've been doing the last couple of years, why you're particularly interested in this job, what current job you're in, and why you might want to move. So something that helps ground you so that I know why you're interested in this job and the kind of person you are, the kind of background you have, and why you've decided to come in for this interview. I should probably see a lot of this already, and I can see there's a LinkedIn question coming up. But yes, it's to help me to get to know you, because I want to be able to ask you questions. So tell me the interesting, useful things about you that's going to help me ask you questions for me to see if you're right for the job. Help me. That's what it is, really. It's grounding who you are and giving me context about you. So not a life story, but also nothing too short.
Thank you.
How important do you feel LinkedIn is as part of the hiring process? Is it something that can really benefit someone, or would you not look at this during or past the interview stage? Now, I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn. Part of that is because I can see it's kind of like a CV on steroids. I find CVs really useful, and I find LinkedIn even more useful. And the reason for that is I can see kind of how long you've been, where you've worked, who else has worked in particular places. Sometimes I might do a little bit of digging and investigation work. If I've seen that somebody has worked with somebody that I know, I might have a chat with them and say, oh, what was such and such a person like? Or I might see that they've got reviews, those not reviews, what is it called when people write nice things about recommendations? That's actually began with an R. They're super useful. I really like to see them. If someone's taken the time to write something about you, it doesn't have to be about your job. It could be like, oh, I love working with such and such a person because they always were super helpful, or with a smile on their face, or they ask the best questions and help me think. That's as useful as like someone is a brilliant designer. So I find it really useful to contextualize someone. I wouldn't be looking at that alone. And I understand that junior people don't really have a LinkedIn presence, and that's completely fine too. But for someone who's probably senior and above, I'd find LinkedIn really useful, and it's worth nurturing it. It's worth going and asking for some recommendations to make sure you've got a good story in there, that you've described each of your jobs. And if you're, as we discussed earlier, your job, some of your skills are transferable. So think about your narrative. If you're talking about being a designer, but you've got a background in BI, that's actually really interesting. And you could tailor your BI bit in LinkedIn to highlight some of the skills that are transferable into design. So yeah, people do use LinkedIn. It is important. And I think nurture it and make sure it's supporting the story you're telling about yourself. Cool. Are we out of questions?
I think we might be out of questions from the audience for now. But Jane, I just want to give you a breather there, because you've answered questions for 45 minutes. So really appreciate that. I guess like one question that I think everybody thinks about, but probably doesn't want to ask is, has there ever been a situation where you've been asked a question, but you don't actually know the answer?
Me? Or
yeah, just like in the interview process, have you ever asked something you're like, I actually don't know how to answer this?
That's totally fine, yeah. And I think that's okay too. I mean, you do this, I think maybe another American trend is these kind of like unanswerable questions, or ones like, so I think Google interviewing. I was reading one about Elon Musk the other day, and apparently he asked everyone, where in the world would you be if you walk 1 mile north, 1 mile south, 1 mile west? And the answer is you're back at where you started. I can't even remember. It was a ludicrous question, but actually the answer was the North Pole. So it was a logical question. But yeah, there's loads of these awful questions. So if it's one of them, I'd maybe just ask for clarification. But if it's a question that you simply can't answer, I think that's completely fine. Is deal with it gracefully. Just say, I'm sorry, I've never experienced that, or it's not something that's happened to me, or do you know what? I've frozen a little bit. Can we come back to that? I think it's okay. Just don't. I think as long as you don't sort of sit there panicking and freezing, just say to someone, I'm sorry, my mind's gone blank. Let's come back to that. I think that's okay. Just deal with it gracefully. Everyone's human. It's okay.
I actually had.
Sorry,
Jenny.
No, that's fine. I think it's absolutely fine to say that that's never happened to you, but I think that when you do that, really listen to what they're asking you. So I did some interview prep with somebody that said they'd never experienced conflict, and I think that makes a person sound very unaware of themselves, because we've all experienced conflict at some point in our life. So if it is a ridiculous question, I think that's a fine thing to answer. But do think about what they're asking you. And you could say, could we come back to that at the end of the interview? Or like you said, before, can you rephrase that and ask me in a different way, just to try and jog my memory to get the process flowing?
Yeah. Yes, totally.
Mm-hmm. I just for transparency, I went for an interview not that long ago, and I went and I was asked a question I had no idea to answer. It was like completely it was just completely through me. And I felt so embarrassed not having like a backup question or a backup kind of phrase to say. So I think that question might help a lot of people, just to be honest. I was honest. I said, I have no idea how to spin a business up with, I don't know. It was like some random question, like, you have 30 minutes, spin a business up on Google Ads, and it's just like, what? So yeah, it was like weird, but yeah, it was, I think that will help people. I guess one other question that often gets asked is potentially, in situations, is tell me a time when you've worked towards a deadline. Mm-hmm. Because what if you come from another industry where you don't necessarily have to work for deadlines? You might not have an example. What would you like to see in that situation, Jane?
Well, you could say I haven't done it in a work situation, but actually in a personal situation, I've got 3 sisters. I've got to get out of the house before 9 o'clock because my mum's working every day. And, I put these 3 systems in place and it's great. I'll be like, fantastic. It doesn't have to necessarily be work. And I think Jenny's right. Like, what are you actually being asked? So if it's a question about spinning up a business or about Elon Musk walking north, I don't really know what you'd be asked there. But if the question's trying to understand how you approach life, and do you have some organizations, can you meet a deadline? You can pull from examples that aren't to do with work. And I think these are the questions you do need to answer. So I think you have to sort of distinguish between nonsensical questions and questions which you might not be able to answer initially, but it's when I'm doing my investigation to see if you're somebody who's going to come in and be on time and be cheerful and be able to, like, you know, have enough self-awareness not to be blunging around like an elephant causing chaos. These are the questions you do need to answer. And if you haven't got examples from work, I think life examples, as long as they're, you know, not too controversial, still shows you have the self-awareness to be able to answer. So God, it's a nightmare, interviews, isn't it? I mean, it's a nightmare from both sides, because I'm not there trying to trip people up. I'm trying to see if they're, you know, I've got a small team of people. Is this person going to come in and, you know, they'll be happy, we'll be happy, and they'll be like somebody that I'm happy to see in the morning. That's all I want, really. You know, somebody it's just that they're thriving and we're all really happy with the person in the team. But it's really difficult. So I'm not there to trick anyone. It's more I'm just trying to assess, is this a place where both sides are going to really have a positive experience? And so you're just trying to reassure me that, yes, this is the kind of person I am, and be honest about the kind of person you are to an extent. And so I understand the shape of you if you're going to be happy and thrive with me. That's it, really. It's really difficult for me too. I'm not there to trick you. I just think 90% of interviewers aren't there to trick you. They're there to try and assess if you're going to be happy in my team.
Can I just offer one more insight as well into answering those nonsensical questions? Because if you go for an interview at a big tech company, I know 2 big tech companies that do tend to ask those. So one of them was, how would you calculate how many ping pong balls are in this room? But they want to know your thought process behind it. So if you don't know, you talk about actually how you might begin to work that out, where you'd find out, you know, how you'd analyze it. And so just think about, you know, just talk out loud about what you might do to be able to answer that question. Say, I don't know, but these are the steps I would take. This is the research that I would do. Just so you can see how you process and how you think and how you work and how you analyze and how you problem solve.
Exactly, yes. These questions are more common in big tech companies. And they're actually very typical sort of developer questions, very kind of logical structure. This is how I think. And I don't know, they're perhaps useful for going as for a developer interview, but if you're going there as a sort of HR specialist, possibly less so. But these are very American tech dominated cultures. And so they will be asking questions to see how you think analytically. But actually what they should be asking questions to see how what your EQ is like rather than your IQ, but they don't. Yeah, I could talk for that one too.
And Jane, just to follow on from what you just said there, you know, the kind of the deadline part, you know, could you pull in something from, you know, I'm training for a 10K that's in September. You know, that's the deadline. You know, I'm just trying to help students that might not have like touch points
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Would that be an okay example to use?
It would for me. Now, this is a question. Would it be for Google? I don't know, but it certainly would for me. Like somebody said to me, yeah, you know, I've got this life goal. I'm doing the 10K. Maybe I'm doing it for this reason or that reason, and I haven't really run before, but I'm going to do this, and I've broken it down into chunks, and this is why I'm doing it. And there I'm seeing planning, motivation, maybe thinking of others if it's a charity thing, you know, why people are doing things, the fact they can stick to something. It's really difficult to stick to getting fit, I know, you know, so there's I'm seeing determination, you know, so that's super useful, totally, because these again are the skills I want. If you know that the skills that are needed, and these, we're going back to kind of EQ again, determination, motivation, structure. These aren't about working out, analyzing how many ping pong balls, although that is useful if you're a Google developer. But what is interesting there is the fact that you've got this sort of grit and determination and self-awareness and planning that's going to make you like somebody who's enjoyable to work with, and that's great. So that story I think is useful, but it probably depends on the employer. While I find it interesting, maybe somebody else wouldn't. Sorry, it's just don't guess what's in your interviewer's head very often, but I think it's a good example of demonstrating soft skills which will make you a desirable employee.
Yeah, and I just want to caveat that. I know that was like a really able-bodied question or scenario. So if you're unable to run a 10K, just, you know, that could apply to, you know, I want to learn a musical instrument because I've got this gig or I've got this charity event. Like there are many other ways to frame that, but I just wanted to caveat that was a very able-bodied comment of mine to make. But the next question that we have is, this isn't an interview question, but what was the key differences between working at an agency, client-facing versus in-house, which I know you have experience of, Jane?
Yeah. Probably the biggest difference, I think, is the work. And there's sort of pros and cons to both. So often in-house, you're working on the same product for ages, you really understand the audience, but often it's quite tricky to get what you want done. You'd have to convince up the chain, or you need to like strong kind of executive cover, or sometimes things don't happen. This is a negative. Agency, maybe you don't get to be working on the same client all the time. Sometimes you do, but the joy of that is that often the argument's been won. And so you have the executive sponsor, because there's a senior person who's gone and got a lot of money and buy-in to come and work with the agency. So you can just concentrate on the work instead of the politics. So and again, I think to do longevity of the work, but you can have both. The top cover of the work, and guess both places you have both. Agency perhaps more variety. Maybe you have to pitch in an agency. You have to go and convince people that they should come and work with you. So it's like lots of ongoing interviews, actually. Mm-hmm. That's probably the biggest difference. Whereas in a in-house, you don't have to be going out and pitching quite so much, but you would be having to do lots of big presentations to get the exec to buy into what you do. There's actually lots and lots of similarities. I think it's maybe just you get smaller, more diverse projects more often with agencies.
Okay. And would that be the same for consultancies too? Would you interpret consultancies to have very similar?
Yeah, probably. Very similar. Structure. And the consultancies, often you can go in and people have to listen to you because you've been brought in to consult. Mm-hmm. That's quite fun. In-house, maybe you have to actually deliver what the consultancy have said. So yeah, I think it's to do with longevity and what kind of level you're operating at, and if you have the top cover or not, and who you get to speak to. But it all depends on the in-house and the agency. I have to say Digitas is fantastic. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, okay. So maybe, Jane, it might be nice to know about like what you're hiring for at the minute. Like, are there anyone on the call, are there any opportunities in the future that people on the call might be able to apply for?
And I will have to go very quickly because I've got a meeting, but I'm going to just tell you very quickly that I'm hiring right now. I'm still hiring pretty senior roles because the team is still quite new, but we will be opening up sort of apprentice and more junior roles. So hopefully this time next year, if not sooner. So please stay in touch. Mm-hmm. I'm also trying to get some more internships roles opened up, but because the team's been really small, I need to make sure I've got enough senior people to support any interns so that they're looked after. But yes, please get in touch. Add me on LinkedIn, drop me an email. Definitely stay in touch. And if there's anything I can help with, I'm very happy to. And I believe Kirsty and I are trying to find a date for everyone to come into Digitas and have a bit of interview practice, meet the team, see what's going on. And we could also get to know each other then. And then, as I said, we're opening up it's like a future apprenticeship, hopefully this time next year, if not sooner.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that's a great note to leave this call on. So thank you so much, Jane, for your time. Thank you, Jenny, for joining us and added some additional insight. We hope that you've enjoyed and got some insights from the conversation. But what I'll do is I'll email everybody your details so everyone's got them.
Yes, please.
But yeah, thank you so much.
A pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the fantastic questions. They're super smart. Thank you. Okay. Lovely to meet you too, Jenny. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye-bye.